What's coming up? Jimmy Carter's body lies in state at the U.S. Capitol as a bipartisan delegation of members of Congress honor the 39th president. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump insists that a hostage deal to release Israeli captives in Gaza must be completed by the time he takes the oath of office on January 20th. And the U.S. imposes sanctions on Sudan's rapid support forces amid a conflict that has killed tens of thousands of people and driven millions from their homes. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. A bipartisan delegation of members of Congress, Vice President Kamala Harris, and members of President Joe Biden's cabinet, and 3 of the 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices honored Jimmy Carter on Tuesday as the body of the nation's 39th president arrived to lie in state in the U.S. Capitol. Harris eulogized Carter as distinguished guests and members of Carter's family assembled in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. Carter, a one-term Democratic president and Nobel Peace Prize winner, will lie in state in Washington for 2 days, allowing the American public to pay its final respects. Congressional leadership also recalled his presidency, which occurred during a tumultuous time in American history. Carter was the longest-living U.S. president, dying at 100 years old. His post-White House career, traveling the world, engaged in diplomacy and charity work, redefined how American presidents lived after their terms in office. For more on how former U.S. President Jimmy Carter is being remembered, I'm joined live from Capitol Hill by VOA's Philip Alexiou. Philip, people are still paying their last respects to the late president. What are you seeing around where you are?
Well, it's a very chilly day, Esther, probably 30 degrees if we're lucky, but a lot of people are showing up. You can see many behind me who are coming to pay their respects for the former president. And speaking with some people before they came here, a lot of them are just here to remember his lifetime of service, and many of them are proud of the way he lived his life. And I was able to bring in Jacqueline Woodard Clark in. She came all the way from Baltimore to pay her respects today. And I wanted to talk with her about why you came out here today, Jacqueline.
Well, first and foremost, I count it as an honor and a privilege to be here to pay my respects to the 39th President of the United States of America. I consider him the greatest president that has led us. Even though it's a somber occasion, I'm grateful to be here for this auspicious and momentous occasion. The reason that I'm here is because he has led a life of humility and simplicity, engulfed in profoundness. He also was a man of integrity, a man of morals, values, and he had high standards. And in the day and age that we live in, we need someone like him. He reminds me of my favorite book, which has a verse that says, "I must do the works of he who sent me while it is yet day, for night comes when no man can work." And truly, he engulfed that he did the work while he could. Even up until his last day, his pastor said that he would always ask him, where has he been? Who was he with? What did he do while he was with them? And how he could help him to help other people. And so with his compassion and his empathy and sympathy for other people, I would find no other reason to do anything else on today but to be here to give my respects to the 39th President of the United States of America.
And very impressive thoughts from you. And a lot of people are here because I've talked to a number of people who talk about his faith and that he lived his life by his faith. And talk a little bit about that if you feel that way, and the way he treated himself as a president. He wasn't really a charismatic guy, is that fair to say?
Yes.
Compared to other presidents?
Yes, but it's not really what you say. It's just how you live your life. The connection to Christ is in how we live and how we treat other people, and he truly did that. Another scripture that I'm reminded of, that it says, let your light so shine before men that they might see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So he did mighty good works even while he was a president, even though a lot of people feel like that he wasn't one of the best presidents. But again, I feel like he was one of the greatest, because even when he had the hostages and they were he was trying to get them to release, he worked tirelessly until his last day of his presidency to make sure that they were released, even though the other president got the credit for them coming home on his watch.
And if you look back at some of the things that he did as humanitarian efforts, Philip,
what
would you say was the one that stood out the most?
Can you hear me? Yeah, we're running out. We got to go on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, thank you. I want to thank Jacqueline so much for your time. It was great to hear from you. Yeah, thanks, Esther. Back to you guys.
Right. Philip Alexiou there for us at Capitol Hill. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump did not rule out using military or economic coercion to gain control of the Panama Canal and Greenland during a wide-ranging news conference in Florida on Tuesday. White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara reports his remarks came after hours after his son made a surprise trip to Greenland.
Greenland, the ice-covered semi-autonomous Danish territory, and the canal belonging to Panama that connects the Caribbean Sea with the Pacific Ocean. The United States must control both, said President-elect Donald Trump. At a press conference in Mar-a-Lago on Tuesday, Trump was asked if he can assure he would not use economic and military coercion to do so.
No, I can't assure you on either of those two, but I can say this. We need them for economic security.
Last week, Panama celebrated the 25th anniversary of the transfer of the canal from the United States.
En nuestras manos se va a quedar para siempre.
The canal is going to stay in our hands forever. Today we see the Panamanian flag flying freely, as if it had always been there.
And since 1941, the U.S. has maintained a military base in Greenland, which is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but has wide-ranging autonomy.
People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world. You don't even need binoculars. You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen.
Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has repeatedly said Greenland is not for sale. She said it again Tuesday as the president-elect's son, Donald Trump Jr., arrived for a previously unannounced visit to the territory.
I will make it very clear that seen with the eyes of the Danish government, Greenland is for the Greenlandic people.
During Tuesday's press conference, Trump was also asked whether he would use military force to annex Canada, which he suggested should be part of the U.S.
No, economic force. Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
Outgoing Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said on social media, quote, "There isn't a snowball's chance in hell that Canada would become part of the United States." It's unclear whether the president-elect is aiming to deliver on these threats or use them as a negotiation tactic under his America First foreign policy as he prepares to come into office on January 20th.
We live in a society where a lot of these decisions are not made on a unilateral basis. And even if the Trump administration wanted to be expansionist and invade other countries, how realistic can this be in terms of force and retaliation?
Trump reiterated his threat to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican goods unless both countries increase security on their border with the U.S. He said he will rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
Trump is insisting that a deal to release about 100 hostages that remain captive in Gaza must be completed by the time he takes the oath of office on January 20th. Trump reiterated his threat that, quote, all hell will break out in the Middle East if the hostages are not released before his January 20th inauguration. Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who also spoke briefly at a news conference at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, said that he expected to depart for Qatar this week, but did not say who he would be meeting with during his visit to the region. Witkoff added that progress is being made on landing a deal. The United States has slapped sanctions on the leader of the Sudan's Rapid Support Forces after it determined Tuesday that the RSF and allied militias committed genocide in Sudan. The moves deal a blow to the RSF's attempts to burnish its image and assert legitimacy, including by installing a civilian government, as the paramilitary group seeks to expand its territory beyond the roughly half of the country it currently controls. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said in a statement the RSF and aligned militias had continued to direct attacks against civilians, adding they had systematically murdered men and boys on an ethnic basis and had deliberately targeted women and girls from certain ethnic groups for rape and other forms of sexual violence. For more on U.S. sanctions against Sudan's Rapid Support Forces, I'm joined from here in Washington by Brian Adeba. Brian is a senior policy advisor at the Center for Sudan and South Sudan. Brian, welcome again to Africa 54.
Thank you very much.
Now, what do you think led the United States to impose sanctions on RSF now after several years of this war?
Well, when you look at the record of the RSF and the atrocities that were happening on the ground, it necessitated this action to be taken. Increasingly, we've seen atrocities against civilians going up on a scale that's unprecedented, and that led to policy wonks across the world, activists and Sudanese citizens themselves asking for some form of accountability.
Brian, how effective would these sanctions be, and can they force Hemeti to stop the war?
Sanctions in and of themselves can not actually force any stoppage to any conflict. They have to be accompanied by other actions. Specifically, they have to be accompanied by a political strategy, a diplomatic and political strategy that would lead to the end of the conflict. And sanctions is just one of the items in the toolkit. If you impose sanctions, then you also have to be articulating a strategy of how to bring people to the negotiating table and then reach a political settlement. And I believe this is just one part of it. And those that have the United States is actually right now involved in a political strategy to address the conflict in Sudan. And I think as we go forward in the coming months, we will begin hopefully to see some negotiations picking up because of this.
Brian, some people may wonder why these sanctions were imposed on the RSF and not also on the Sudan's army led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. What are the possible answers here?
Well, this is not a question of who is more or less evil than the other in comparing the RSF and the Sudan armed forces. This is a question of who is actually committing the genocide, who is committing the mass atrocities right now. And the evidence suggests overwhelmingly that the RSF is at the forefront of these atrocities, and that's why it was sanctioned.
And how would you characterize this war in terms of how it has impacted civilians in Sudan, and even having a little hope about having some normalcy in the near future?
It's a good question. The war has been very devastating. Nearly 30% of Sudan's population has been displaced. The UNHCR says that at least 11 million people in the country have been displaced. Another 3 million have been forced to refuge in neighboring countries. The infrastructure in the country has been devastated and brought to the ground. And there's a famine looming in Sudan. So all of these factors indicate that this is really a very devastating consequence.
Brian, right. Brian, I wish we had more time to figure out whether they need to go to The Hague or not, but time is not on our side today. Brian Adeba is a senior policy advisor at the Center Air Force, and also an analyst for Sudan and South Sudan. The Seychelles archipelago off the east coast of Africa is a cultural melting pot. Long-time residents there include people with Chinese ancestry. But Beijing's investments in the strategically located country have also attracted new arrivals from China looking to do business with the island nation. Kate Bartlett reports from the main island of Mahe.
Chinese flavors, sometimes with a touch of Creole.
Let's say chow mein. It's a Chinese dish. It's a chow mein. Mein is the noodle, but we say chow mein. So it is cooked in the Creole cuisine.
Chinese Seychellois culture is not only reflected in the food here, it's also a part of the background of people like Molly Rosalie and other residents in Seychelles who have Chinese ancestry. Rosalie speaks fluent Mandarin and introduces the local culture to the new wave of Chinese tourists and business people here. However, the new arrivals from China and the long-time residents here don't share too much in common, says Paul Chow, who is also of Chinese descent.
I speak only Creole, and they speak only Chinese, so there's no way I could mix with them.
In recent years, China has directed its attention to strategically placed Seychelles, whose location gives it easy access to Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. This island was not the point of destination when Chow's father arrived.
My father came to Seychelles in 1943, I think. But he came to Seychelles by accident.
Originally from southern China, Chow's father was heading to Madagascar, a popular place at the time for Chinese people seeking work. Someone on the boat got sick, and the passengers were quarantined. Here, in Seychelles, Chow's father stayed, found work, and married a local woman.
Chinese moved anywhere they think there's an opportunity.
In its history, Seychelles has been a part of France, then Britain, before gaining independence in 1976. It is now home to a majority of people who are Creole, with French and African ancestry. Descendants of Chinese migrants make up some 500 to 1,000 of the population here. Most of their ancestors left China to escape poverty. Then, more than 10 years ago, Beijing started funding construction projects in Seychelles, bringing in a new wave of Chinese workers. China's ambassador to Seychelles describes them as symbols of bilateral friendship.
Certainly for the 4 years that I've been foreign minister, I've seen how that relationship has grown.
I don't think the Chinese would do anything with Seychelles except want to locate, have an interest here so that they can oversee what's happening in the Indian Ocean. China is so rich now, everybody welcomes the Chinese.
With tourism being one of the main industries here, guides such as Rosalie look forward to a newly launched direct charter flight from China, with the hope that it will bring new waves of business to Seychelles. Kate Bartlett, VOA News, Mahe, Seychelles.
Still to come, firefighters battle a fast-moving wildfire in Los Angeles. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, this year South Africa presides over G20. The crisis in Sudan and the Democratic Republic of the Congo deepen. The African Growth and Opportunity Act is up for renewal, and young Africans are demanding change. Join me, Vincent Makori, for a look into major events that will shape the political and economic landscape on the African continent in 2025.
In other news, over 9 million children are currently out of school across Ethiopia due to conflict, violence and natural disasters, with more than 6,000 schools closed, according to the United Nations. The UN Children's Fund says the highest numbers of out-of-school children are found in the Amhara region with 4.4 million, followed by the Oromia region with 3.2 million and the Tigray region with about 1.2 million children. The United Nations Humanitarian Affairs Office says recent fighting in part of Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo has displaced more than 100,000 people. The M23 rebels on Saturday seized control of Masisi. In recent days, there have been intense clashes between the Congolese army and armed groups in North Kivu province. And a baby was born at sea during a perilous crossing of the Atlantic Ocean by migrants from Africa. A Spanish rescue craft reached people adrift in a small rubber boat heading to Spain's Canary Islands. The boat carrying the newborn mother and other passengers was so packed that some people straddled its sides. Firefighters are battling a fast-moving wildfire in the Los Angeles hillsides. Forecasters warn that the worst may be yet to come, with a windstorm predicted to last 4 days, producing isolated gusts that could top 160 kilometers per hour in the mountains and foothills. The winds are already toppling trees, creating dangerous surf and bringing extreme wildfire risk to areas that haven't seen substantial rain in months. Meanwhile, fire crews are working to extinguish fires in the foothills of the Pacific Palisades areas in western Los Angeles, where residents were ordered to evacuate. The Palisades fire swiftly consumed more than 81 hectares of dry brush and sent a huge plume of smoke visible across the city. President-elect Donald Trump's climate plan includes rolling back vehicle emission standards. He is also promising to reverse the Biden administration's efforts to fight climate change and says he will grow the U.S. economy by drilling for more oil. VOA correspondent Scott Stearns has our story.
Donald Trump campaigned on boosting U.S. fossil fuels.
We will quickly become energy independent, and we will frack, 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 and drill, baby, drill. We're going to drill, baby, drill, and frack, frack, frack.
Joe Biden's administration invested in building out the nation's electric vehicle charging network and worked with congressional Democrats to create a national service program on climate change as part of what Biden called a Green New Deal. Trump says that's a Green New Scam that he will end, along with electric vehicle subsidies and tougher gasoline engine emission standards. In his first term, Trump withdrew from an international climate treaty.
The Paris Climate Accord is simply the latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States.
Trump supporters in Congress say his commitment to oil and natural gas in a second term positions U.S. producers to capitalize on growing global energy demands without the limits of climate deals. Those changes may have less of an impact than they would have 10 years ago, says energy analyst Zara Ahmed.
The president has broad power to repeal through the regulatory process proposed and existing regulations, including for things like power plant emissions of methane, for vehicle emissions as well. However, at the same time, consumers can choose to purchase a low emissions vehicle. States can choose to enact their own regulations about emissions, as we see California do. So again, I think while the federal government is an incredibly powerful tool, that doesn't mean that we're at the end of climate action in the U.S.
The new administration has many reasons to remain engaged on renewable energy.
Most of those battery factories are built out in states with Republican governors, and they don't want those factories unplugged from their economies, and they don't want those workers laid off. They want this prosperity to continue.
Industry analysts say Trump's commitment to deregulating American business may end up helping renewable energy by speeding the permitting of new transmission lines. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
The war in Gaza is intensifying the connection that many Jews around the world feel. Israel has sparked a wave of immigration to the Jewish state, and at the same time, a growing number of Israelis are leaving the country, at least for now. Linda Gradstein reports from Jerusalem.
Rachel Dalit moved from the U.S. to Israel to play professional women's soccer. A recent graduate of the University of Wisconsin, she says she felt unsafe walking through the pro-Palestinian encampments on her school's campus after the war between Israel and Hamas began in 2023. She was even attacked with a heavy object that someone threw at her when she draped an Israeli flag around her shoulders.
The war deepened my connection to the Israeli people, to the Jewish homeland, and made me want to be with more people like myself. I come from a small community of Jews in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and obviously being here, majority of people are Jewish, and just being surrounded with that on a daily is something special.
Dalit says her family is proud of her accomplishments in Israel, but worried about her safety.
From my parents' perspective, it feels scarier, and they're scared for my safety, but I've never felt safer. And Israelis are living their daily lives, and to the fullest, they value life so much.
Israel's immigration minister, Ophir Sofer, says 33,000 immigrants have come to Israel in the past year, despite the war and rocket attacks on much of Israel. Immigrants from North America get support from Nefesh B'Nefesh, an organization that facilitates Jewish immigration. Officials with the organization say there has been a 60% increase in immigration applications in the past year, although they're not sure how many will move to the country.
When the war happened, I think there was an incredible emotional connection that people had. First was the shock and the terror of digesting what happened. But in reaction, some people really saw their connection strengthen and saw their place in Israel.
The Hamas attack of October 7, 2023 had a personal effect on Peter Sugarman, a British private equity businessman. He and his wife were visiting Israel with their son and grandchildren on that day and had to take refuge in their hotel bomb shelter for many hours. Exactly a year later, on October 7, 2024, he and his wife became new immigrants.
My wife and I felt after that the time had come to make a concerted effort to arrive in Israel within a year of that date. We felt that we wanted to, the best way of supporting the Jewish people was to get even more involved, and that meant coming to Israel.
At the same time as immigrants are coming to Israel, many Israelis are leaving. The Central Bureau of Statistics found that more than 82,000 Israelis moved abroad in 2024, in contrast to about 35,000 in past years. Many cited the ongoing war and Israel's political unrest as reasons for leaving. Meanwhile, many of the new immigrants say they are learning to live with the frequent rocket attacks and look forward to contributing to a peaceful Israel in the future. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.